Hello, my YouTube family and night owls. Welcome back to Crime Whispers. I'm here with another mysterious and chilling case to help you drift off to sleep. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Really helps us grow. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now, get cozy, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's begin. Case 1. Every town has a dark side. The overlook at Harper's Ferry National Park was usually nothing more than a scenic pit stop, a place where tourists snap photos of the misty Virginia hills or began their morning hikes. But in the spring of 1996, just as the sun began to rise, that quiet overlook became the scene of something unimaginable. A place of beauty transformed into the center of a haunting crime, and at the heart of it, a land old steamer trunk, and what was found inside it. This is the story of the man in the trunk, a cold case that would take nearly a decade to solve. And when the truth finally surfaced, the face of evil turned out to be one no one expected. It was May 14th, 1996, Loudoun County, Virginia. Sheriff's Deputy Clark Jackson was on his usual early morning patrol. For 3 years, he'd followed the same route: check the visitor center, scan the lots, and swing by the overlooks. Most mornings, the only signs of life were the occasional deer or a couple of hikers prepping for the day. But this morning was different. As Jackson's cruiser rounded the bend toward the Route 340 overlook, his headlights caught something odd, something that didn't belong. A large, old-fashioned steamer trunk. The kind you'd expect to find in a dusty attic, not abandoned next to a trash can in a national park. It looked expensive, out of place, and something about it sent a shiver up the deputy's spine. Jackson parked, stepped out, and approached the trunk, his flashlight slicing through the early morning fog. The leather was worn, the brass fittings dulled with age. He gave it a nudge with his boot, and it didn't move. It was heavy. Far too heavy for ordinary luggage. Uneasy now, he knelt down and popped the latch. Inside, a large duffel bag had been jammed awkwardly into the space. He reached for the zipper, slowly pulled it open, and, staring back at him in the flashlight's beam, was a single lifeless eye. The body inside the duffel was that of an elderly man, contorted tightly into a fetal position. He was thin, severely emaciated, his skin stretched taut over his bones. The sun had risen by the time backup arrived. Under the full light of day, the horror became clear. The victim had been restrained. His clothes were filthy and hung off. His frail frame, his body bore marks, abrasions, old and new. There was evidence of prolonged suffering. A blow to the back of his head, bruises on his wrists, and worst of all, the toxicology report revealed heavy doses of sedatives in his bloodstream. Whoever did this hadn't killed him quickly, they had broken him down, piece by piece, over time. This was not a spur moment crime. This was planned cruelty. Despite the grisly evidence, investigators were left with almost nothing to go on. No ID, no wallet, no documents, not even a receipt or scrap of paper. Fingerprints were run through every database. Local, state, federal, nothing. DNA testing was attempted, but this was 1996, too early for the breakthroughs that would come later. The samples were insufficient. They widened the net, combing through missing persons reports, starting in Virginia, then branching into Maryland and West Virginia. Photo comparisons, interviews, dead end after dead end. No one was looking for this man. No family came forward. No neighbors. It was as if he'd never existed at all. Then came one odd little detail. The trunk, among the worn leather and brass. Crime scene techs noticed something small, teeny, dried splashes of nail polish, pink and purple. Faded, but distinct. The kind of random marks you might find on a teenage girl's belongings. They documented it, photographed it, but at the time it felt meaningless. They had no idea those smudges of nail polish would eventually break the entire case wide open. For now, though, the trail went cold. The man in the trunk had been killed, tortured, discarded. But in some ways, what disturbed people even more was this. No one even knew his name. A father, maybe. A grandfather. A friend. A neighbor. And nobody, not a single soul, seemed to be missing him. It was as if the killer hadn't just ended his life, they had erased it. And for the next 7 years, the mystery of the old man in the trunk would remain unsolved. The trunk remained unmarked. Just another unidentified man and unclaimed body in the morgue. Another case buried deep in the cold files of law enforcement, seemingly forgotten. But then, in January of 2003, something changed. A long overdue breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The Department of Defense granted the FBI access to its internal fingerprint database. And within moments, the man in the trunk had a name. Jasper Frederick Watkins, known to those who loved him simply as Jack. And Jack Watkins wasn't just some anonymous victim. He had lived a full life. A life marked by struggle, service, and eventually betrayal. Born March 21st, 1920. In Richmond, Virginia, Jack was a product of hard times. He grew up during the Great Depression, when money was scarce and community meant everything. At just 21 years old, Jack answered the call of duty, enlisting in the Army, only weeks before the bombing of Pearl Harbor. He couldn't have known that his decision would place him squarely in the path of one of history's most brutal wars. Jack spent the next 4 years fighting through the horrors of World War II, bearing witness to the worst of humanity, and somehow preserving the best of it in himself. He came home a survivor. He built a life. He gave back. And decades later, that same man was found folded into a duffel bag, stuffed inside a trunk, discarded like garbage. That wasn't just murder. That was a tragedy. A quiet hero of history, reduced to a nameless corpse, tossed away. He deserved so much more. Once authorities finally knew who he was, they began to piece together what had happened. And that's when they discovered something disturbing. Someone had been cashing Jack's Social Security checks 7 years after his death. The checks were traced to a P.O. box in Ellicott City, Maryland. That small clue cracked open the real story, because it turned out Jack hadn't been killed by a stranger. He wasn't robbed by a drifter or attacked by some random predator. His killer was someone close to him, someone he had trusted, someone he loved. To understand how Jack Watkins ended up in that steamer trunk, we have to rewind to the day an aging widower opened his front door to find a woman smiling warmly, offering to sell him a burial plot, realizing he was looking into the eyes of his future murderer. After returning from the war, Jack wanted what every soldier dreams of: peace. He found steady work at a small auto parts shop, nothing flashy, just honest labor in a neighborhood where people knew and respected him. He became a fixture in the community, the go-to guy for car advice, the friendly face behind the counter, the dependable man who never caused trouble. For years, his life was simple: work, home, and church on Sundays. That all changed in 1964, when Jack met Mary Triplett, a divorced mother of 3 grown daughters. She was warm, comforting, and kind, and something about her drew Jack in. By 44, Jack had found the love of his life. Mary's daughters were unsure at first, but Jack didn't try to be their new father. He simply showed up. He helped them move. He sat proudly at their graduations, and over time, he became the man they leaned on, the father figure they hadn't known they needed. Jack and Mary built a modest life together. They weren't wealthy, but they were content. Then, in 1989, everything changed. Mary was diagnosed with cancer. It came fast, and it was merciless. Within months, she was gone. Jack was devastated. He sold the family home, retired, and moved to a quiet little house in Reisterstown, Maryland. He lived frugally on a monthly $1,200 Social Security check, clipping coupons, driving his old car, and stretching every dollar. He lived simply, until $1,995. That year, everything about Jack's financial habits changed. He withdrew equity from his home. He bought a brand new BMW for $44,000, unthinkable purchase for a man so careful with money. Then, in 1996, he sold his house and somehow only received $3,800 from the sale. Something was terribly wrong. When investigators dug into his finances, it became clear Jack hadn't just lost money. He had been systematically drained, stripped of every dollar, every asset with surgical precision. And the trail led straight to the Ellicott City P.O. box registered to a woman named Nancy Siegel. But Nancy wasn't just a random con artist. She was something much darker, a chameleon, a predator, a woman who had spent her entire adult life perfecting the art of manipulation. Born in 1948, Nancy's early life seemed tragic. Her mother abandoned the family. Her father raised her alone until he was murdered outside a bar when Nancy was just 16, looking for an escape. Nancy briefly found local fame dancing on the Buddy Dean Show, a Baltimore teen dance program that later inspired the musical Hairspray. But behind the cheerful smile was something deeply twisted. Her first known victim was her high school sweetheart, Charles Karski, whom she married in 1968. 4 years, things appeared normal. She raised their children, played the perfect wife. But behind the scenes, she was spiraling, fueling a growing gambling addiction to feed her habit. Nancy began forging her husband's name on credit cards and loans. By the time they divorced in 1985, he was $120,000 in debt and forced to declare bankruptcy. Victim 1. Next came Ted Gazzaniga, her second husband. She forged checks, redirected mortgage payments to herself, and drained his finances. These weren't crimes of passion. They were calculated rehearsals. Nancy was refining her method. She began stealing mail, swiping wallets, collecting social security numbers, licenses, anything she could use. She was arrested more than once, but never faced serious consequences. The charges were spread across jurisdictions, and she rarely spent more than 2 weeks behind bars. But then in November 1994, while selling burial plots door to door, Nancy Siegel knocked on the door of Jack Watkins, and he invited her in. The lonely widower never stood a chance. Against Nancy Siegel's polished charm and calculated lies, Jack Watkins was completely disarmed. Within weeks, he was introducing her to friends as his fiancée. They were decades apart in age, and worlds apart in lifestyle, but that didn't matter to Nancy, because what followed wasn't love. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Nancy convinced Jack to take out over $60,000 in new mortgages. She opened several credit cards in his name and maxed them out within weeks. Then came the isolation. She cut him off from family and friends, intercepting phone calls and messages, ensuring that anyone who tried to reach Jack never got through. To the outside world, he had simply gone quiet. But inside Nancy's web, he was being drained of everything. Eventually, Nancy's plans hit a complication, a new romance. While still stealing from Jack, Nancy began a relationship with a wealthy loan broker named Eric Siegel. Suddenly, Jack wasn't useful anymore. In fact, he became a liability, someone who knew too much, someone who could ruin everything. And Nancy had never been one to leave loose ends. In April 1996, she forced Jack to sell his home, then moved him into her house. What happened next is almost too cruel to imagine. She began drugging him with sedatives, and slowly, methodically, she started to starve him. By May 13th, Jack was a shell of the man he had once been. At 76 years old, he had been reduced to skin and bone. Nancy then packed his frail body into a duffel bag, forced it into a trunk, and drove to Virginia. She dumped the trunk near a trash bin by an access point to the Appalachian Trail, like it was nothing. The trunk itself had once belonged to her daughter, and perhaps Nancy, assumed it would just be taken away with the rest of the garbage. But what she didn't count on was Deputy Clark Jackson doing his early morning rounds. As police worked to identify the body and piece together the crime, Nancy moved on with her life. She married Eric Siegel in December 1998, and true to form immediately defrauded him of nearly $300,000. Eric never reported her. Instead, he paid off her debts himself. But by 2003, the truth was finally catching up with Nancy Siegel. The FBI had matched Jack's fingerprints, and the case was back on. When investigators tracked her down, everything began to fall into place. Nancy had been the one to help Jack sell his house. She had encouraged him to buy that Altuve character $44,000 BMW. And now, she was suddenly faced with a flood of questions. Rather than answer them, she put on a performance bursting into tears when shown photos of the trunk. Through sobs, she spun a wild tale. She claimed to be Jack's caretaker, said he was like a father to her, that he suffered from dementia. She even tried to convince investigators that Jack had taken his own life, claiming she had found him hanging from a ceiling fan and had panicked. It was a desperate lie, one that no one believed. In the end, it was the people who knew her best who delivered the final blow. Her own daughters. They revealed the truth about their mother's long trail of fraud and destruction. She had even stolen their identities and ruined their credit. They had no interest in protecting her. When shown a photo of the trunk, one daughter immediately recognized it as her own, pointing out the small nail polish stains on the outside as proof. It was a detail only she could confirm, and the exact detail that cracked the entire case wide open. In January 2004, Nancy Siegel was indicted on multiple charges: murder, theft of government property, identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, and mail fraud. Her trial began in 2009, and after just 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty on 20 of 21 counts. She would never rejoin society. Again, justice at last was served, but the story of the man in the trunk has one final chapter. In August 2009, 13 years after his body was found at that lonely overlook, Jasper Jack Watkins was finally laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Representatives from every agency that had worked his case stood by to honor him. A man who had served his country with dignity. A man who had endured a betrayal he never deserved, and who had, at long last, been given the respect he was owed, because, in the end, evil often hides in plain sight. It could be the person across from you at the dinner table, the neighbor mowing their lawns, or the friendly woman selling burial plots to the very people she plans to kill. Okay, let's move on to case 2. Even before cars were invented, young people sought out hidden places for stolen moments of affection. Back in the 1860s, these secluded spots, often just trails or fields, became known as lovers' lanes. They were quiet, private, out of sight. At first, unmarried couples used them to sneak away from disapproving eyes. Later, married people used them to cheat discreetly, and as horse-drawn buggies gave way to cars, lovers' lanes remained a popular escape for romance or lust. But this secrecy came at a cost, because criminals knew these places were remote, unguarded, and perfect for ambushes, robberies, assaults, and tragically murder. One such case, haunting and brutal, is the story of Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson, a couple who drove to a quiet lover's lane one summer night and were never seen alive again. Cheryl Henry was born October 24, 1967, in Florida, to parents Robert and Barbara. From a young age, she was known for her warmth, kindness, and infectious laughter. She had soft blonde waves, bright blue eyes, and a way of making those around her feel lighter. Her family eventually relocated to Houston, Texas, and in 1986, Cheryl graduated high school and enrolled at Stephen F. Austin State University, about 150 miles from home. By 1990, At 22, she returned to Houston to work as an optometrist and made plans to live with her younger sister Shane while staying with her mother that summer. Cheryl met a young man who would change everything. Andy Garland Andrew Atkinson. Andy was born September 6, 1968, in North Carolina. His parents were just teens when he was born, his mother only 16. Their marriage didn't last long. Andy was raised mostly by his grandmother and became incredibly close to his cousin, Timmy. Despite a rough start, Andy was known for his warmth and loyalty. In 1977, his father, Garland Atkinson, moved to Houston after legal trouble in North Carolina. He'd accidentally shot a man during a fight at Rick's Lounge. The man survived, and the charges were eventually dropped. Still, it painted a clear picture of who Garland was, a man with a chaotic past that may resurface later in this story. Andy initially followed his dad to Houston, but didn't stay long. He preferred the East Coast, where his friends were. Still, he visited Garland every summer, working the door at Dream Street, a club his father managed. Andy enrolled at Campbell University in North Carolina, but by June 1990, he returned to Houston looking to reconnect with his father and build a new chapter. He started working at Gold's Gym, enrolled at the University of Houston, and planned to begin classes in September. But tragedy struck before that could happen. In early August 1990, Andy went out with a friend to catch up at a regular hangout, the Yucatan liquor stand. That night, his friend brought along a date, and she brought her best friend. Her name was Cheryl Henry. From the very first time they met, there was an undeniable spark between Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson. Cheryl had never been the type to get swept up by boys, but with Andy, it was different. She was completely smitten, and her sister had never seen her so happy. Andy felt it too. The connection was instant, electric. In no time, they became inseparable, both convinced they'd found the one. On the night of August 22, 1990, the couple went out on a double date with Cheryl's younger sister, Shane, and Shane's boyfriend. They ended up at a lively nightclub on South Gessner Road in the heart of Houston. The four of them enjoyed drinks, shared laughs, and basked in the chemistry between Cheryl and Andy. Shane remembers teasing them as they flirted and whispered, joking, "You two need to get a room." Around 11:30 p.m., they did just that, tour, at least. They left to find some privacy. Cheryl and Andy drove out to a secluded Lover's Lane spot in West Houston, a known hangout for young couples looking for some quiet time. But tragically, that was the last time anyone ever saw them alive. The next morning, as was routine, Shane stopped by their mother's house to pick Cheryl up for work, but there was no sign of her. Assuming she'd stayed the night with Andy and just forgotten to call, Shane brushed it off. But as the day went on, worry began to set in. Cheryl never showed up for her shift, which was entirely out of character, and no one could get in touch with Andy either. By 5 p.m. on August 23rd, Cheryl's family reported her missing to the Houston Police Department. That same evening, a security guard working for Cisco Foods came across Andy's white Honda Civic, abandoned at the end of a cul-de-sac near the Lover's Lane area. At first, he thought little of it, but when he returned around 8 p.m. and saw the car still there, he grew uneasy. As he approached, he noticed the windows were down. Inside, the keys were still in the ignition, the seats were fully reclined, and Cheryl's shoes and purse were on the passenger side floor. Most troubling of all were the unmistakable signs of fresh blood. The guard called the police immediately. Before they could arrive, he dialed a number he found inside Cheryl's purse. It belonged to her mother, Barbara. She rushed to the scene, arriving before the officers did. When police checked the license plate and confirmed it was Andy's car, and knowing the couple hadn't been seen since the night before, they knew this was serious. Officers brought in search dogs, and a full search of the surrounding wooded area began with Barbara close behind Dot just before midnight. One of the dogs led them to a horrifying discovery. Cheryl's body, lying about 200 yards from the car. Her murder was so gruesome that officers had to hold her mother back to prevent her from seeing the full extent of it. The killer had placed Andy's golf clubs and balls from the trunk of his car in a line, pointing directly to where Cheryl lay. She was found face down, naked, and partially covered with cedar fence boards. Her clothes had been violently cut off, and her underwear stuffed into the pocket of her jeans. Her hands were tightly bound behind her back with hemp rope. Her throat had been slashed 3 times. A later examination would confirm she had been sexually assaulted, with DNA collected from her remains. But there was more. Above Cheryl's body, hanging from a tree, were 4 partially deflated balloons. Next to her, a crisp $20 bill had been left behind. The scene was surreal, almost theatrical, as if the killer had staged it deliberately, taunting investigators. "I'm not hiding her," he seemed to say, "but I don't want it to be easy either." Due to darkness, the search for Andy had to be paused and resumed the next morning. Nearly 10 hours later, officers found him 75 yards from Cheryl to a tree, his throat slashed so deep that he was nearly decapitated. Unlike Cheryl, Andy was fully clothed. His wallet and watch were still on him. The motive was clearly not robbery, was something far more sinister. Investigators concluded that Cheryl had been killed first, and that Andy likely heard her screams, helpless to stop it. It's believed the killer forced Andy to at gunpoint and tied him up before murdering Cheryl. He may have hoped, at first, that obedience would keep them alive, but he was forced to witness her brutal murder, fully aware of what would come next. The community was shattered, and so were their families. But worst of all, there were no solid leads. Not in 1990. DNA testing was still in its early stages, only introduced 5 years prior in 1985, for Cheryl's rape kit to even be tested. Permission had to be granted by September 1990, a $10,000 reward was posted for information, but despite detectives chasing every potential lead, months turned into years, with no answers. Then, in 2001, 11 years later, mysterious letter arrived at the Houston Police Department. It claimed to have information about the murders, but this wasn't a good Samaritan. The writer demanded $100,000 in exchange for details. The public didn't hear about the letter until 2004. The handwritten message read, HBD, if you want to know who killed C. Henry plus A. Atkinson, it will cost you $100,000. Reply Houston. Chronicle personal column, Monday, March 12, A1. Only a lawyer will be hired to make sure you play straight. The letter had been postmarked March 1, 2001. The police responded as instructed, placing an ad in the Chronicle and including a contact number. But no one ever followed up. Was it a hoax? A cruel joke? Or did someone really know the truth? Simply wanted to cash in. Desperate for any new leads, police eventually released the letter publicly. Over the years, a number of suspects were investigated, but DNA testing cleared each one. Finally, in 2007, the case turned a corner. All DNA samples were retested. It proved to be a pivotal moment. For the first time, DNA from Cheryl's assault matched a sample from another unsolved case, an attack on an exotic dancer that had taken place just 2 months before Cheryl and Andy were murdered. The victim worked at Gigi's nightclub in Houston. After a late shift on June 20, 1990, she went to her boyfriend Randy's house. Randy, a pilot, was away, and she was alone. She made a meal and settled in, unaware that someone was upstairs waiting. The man wore a black fishnet stocking over his head and brandished a long-barreled handgun. He demanded to know where Randy was, claiming Randy owed him money. Then he attacked. He duct-taped her wrists, took $200 from her purse, blindfolded and gagged her, shoved a pillowcase over her head, and raped her. As he did, he played disturbing mind games, cocking and uncocking the gun beside her head, pretending he was about to fire. It was horrifying and eerily similar to the psychological staging at Cheryl's crime scene. The balloons, the golf clubs, the $20 bill. It was a game, and this predator clearly enjoyed it. That same man would later return to the woods and slaughter Cheryl and Andy, two young people, simply in love, leaving behind a nightmare no one would ever forget. She threw him to the floor and disconnected the phone. Despite the stalking over her attacker's head, the victim managed to provide a remarkably detailed description. He was a white male in his late 20s to mid-30s, around 6 feet tall, weighing approximately 180 pounds, with black hair and an olive complexion. He wore black gloves, a dark shirt, and dark pants, possibly a uniform. But what truly stood out was his posture. It was forceful, almost military-like. With her help, authorities produced a composite sketch of the man, later aged to reflect what he might look like today. Although DNA was collected from the assault, forensic science was still in its infancy. Testing was too new, too expensive, and the analysis was shelved, delayed for 17 years. When the DNA was finally tested, it confirmed what detectives had suspected. It matched the DNA found at the scene of Cheryl's murder. The disturbing similarities between the two crimes raised haunting questions. Could Cheryl and Andy have known their killer? In the case of the exotic dancer, it appeared the attacker knew her boyfriend, Randy. This led authorities to theorize that the suspect may have worked at or frequently visited local strip clubs. In a shocking twist, when the dancer was re-interviewed years later, she revealed that she had previously worked at the club managed by Andy's father. Was that just a coincidence? Or had someone targeted Cheryl and Andy out of revenge? In May 2008, Houston police released a composite sketch of the suspected to reflect what he might look like now. But despite advances in forensic technology and new avenues like genealogical DNA testing, the perpetrator's identity has never been discovered. The DNA from both crimes still hasn't matched anyone in the national database, or even in popular genetic testing services like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA. After 34 years, time keeps moving forward, but the case remains at a standstill. Cheryl and Andy's killer is still out there, somewhere. For Cheryl's sister, the question isn't just who did it, but how they've lived with it. I'm more bothered by just knowing what happened, who did it. I'm curious what this person has been doing all their life, how they've been able to live with it every day. Fast forward 2 years from that horrific summer night in 1990 to August 4th, 1992. That's when 23-year-old waitress Tammy Breckenridge vanished after leaving work at the men's club in Houston around 1 a.m. The men's club was only a short distance from Bayou Mamason, other popular nightclub. Tammy had been last seen speaking with the security guard, and then she was gone. To this day, Tammy has never been found, and no one has ever been arrested in connection with her disappearance. Her case joins a chilling pattern. Throughout the early 1990s, multiple young women vanished in Harris County under similarly mysterious circumstances. Most were in their early 20s, with brown or blonde hair, similar heights and weights. They all disappeared in the early morning hours, and many were never found. Houston is a massive metro area, and it's possible these cases are unconnected. But with so many eerie similarities, it's hard to ignore the possibility that they are linked, and that a serial killer may have been operating in plain sight, never identified. Today, Cheryl and Andy's families are still haunted by the silence. Advances in forensic technology have brought justice to countless cold cases across Texas, but theirs remains unanswered. It's hard when people ask us if there's anything new, because for 33 years, there hasn't been. Somewhere, someone knows the truth, and one day, someone might come forward, finally unlocking a decades-old mystery that has tormented families and stunned an entire community. Paramedics worked swiftly to stabilize Mark, administering oxygen and pain relief as he struggled to breathe. With his condition rapidly deteriorating, he was rushed to the hospital. Meanwhile, police officers arrived at the scene and began gathering information. Neighbors confirmed that Mark had named Berlina as his attacker, and combined with his statements to the paramedics, authorities had enough probable cause to act quickly. Police headed to Berlina's flat, where they found her sitting calmly on the sofa, showing no signs of concern or distress despite the chaos unfolding just outside. She made no attempt to assist the man she had just attacked, her demeanor disturbingly indifferent. Officers arrested her on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm. Back at her flat, they collected the acid bottle, now missing its original label, clearly indicating an effort to conceal its true contents. They also seized her electronic devices to search for evidence of premeditation. Throughout her initial arrest, Berlina remained unnervingly composed. When questioned, she claimed she didn't know the bottle contained acid, insisting she thought it was water. But at the hospital, doctors were faced with a horrific reality. Mark had sustained chemical burns over 25% of his body. Large portions of his skin were already turning black. His condition was so grave that doctors placed him in an induced coma to stabilize him. His left leg, badly affected by the acid, showed signs of impaired circulation, raising urgent concerns among the trauma team. As the investigation progressed, a far more sinister picture began to emerge. Police spoke with Mark's family and friends, who described Berlina as increasingly volatile and controlling, especially in the final months of the relationship. They cited prior incidents of abuse, including one where she poured boiling water on him. Investigators also discovered that Berlina had admitted to mental health professionals that she struggled with anger issues since her teenage years. A year before the attack, she told a psychiatric nurse that when someone said the wrong thing to her, she felt a surge of adrenaline and a desire to destroy everything around her. Then came the damning discovery. Berlina had purchased a bottle of 98% concentrated sulfuric acid from Amazon on September 2nd. After receiving it, she deliberately removed the warning label, evidence of a calculated attempt to hide its dangerous nature. The acid was colorless and without the label, indistinguishable from water to an untrained eye. Her internet search history removed any doubt about her intentions. Investigators found she had conducted 82 searches related to sulfuric acid in the weeks leading up to the attack. She had read case studies, researched the long-term effects of acid injuries, and explored the consequences suffered by past victims. This was no impulsive act, it was premeditated and malicious. Perhaps most chilling was her complete lack of remorse. After pouring acid on Mark and witnessing his agonizing screams, she did nothing. She simply sat there, indifferent, as the acid melted his skin and burned deep into his flesh. Her callous inaction spoke volumes to authorities. Despite overwhelming evidence, Berlina maintained her innocence, claiming she thought the bottle contained water. She even accused Mark of planting the acid to trick her into drinking it, a claim strikingly similar to scenarios she had previously read about online. Police found it hard to believe this was a coincidence. Mark remained in intensive care for 4 months. When he finally awoke, the extent of his injuries became heartbreakingly clear. He was paralyzed from the neck down, able to move only his tongue. The acid had caused such extensive damage to his lower left leg that it had to be amputated below the knee. His face was severely disfigured, and he had lost part of his vision. When he first saw his reflection, he sobbed and told his father, "Kill me now. If this is what I look like, I don't want to live." Despite efforts by medical staff and the support of his father, Mark fell into a deep depression. He communicated by using his tongue to point at letters on an alphabet board, a painstaking and emotionally exhausting process. The emotional and physical toll was immense. In November 2016, Mark was transferred to a care home in Gloucester, but his father, Keys, was horrified to find him lying in filth, crying out for help. The family then arranged for a private ambulance to take Mark to Belgium, where they hoped he would receive better care. Although Belgian doctors did their best, Mark's suffering persisted. The acid had burned through tissue and bone, leaving gaping holes in his body and causing constant, excruciating pain. Even though he made some progress, such as regaining the ability to speak, Mark felt hopeless. He asked his father, "What's the point if all I can do is look at the ceiling?" The final blow came when Mark developed a severe lung infection. Doctors informed him that treating it would require a tracheotomy, a procedure that would save his life but take away his ability to speak, the last connection he had to his father in the outside world. For Mark, this was too much. With the support of his family, he applied for voluntary euthanasia, legal in Belgium under certain circumstances. 3 medical specialists reviewed and approved his request, citing his physical and psychological suffering. On January 2nd, 2017, at just 29 years old, Mark passed away peacefully as his father held his hand. The catheter was inserted into his heart, ending his pain and suffering. Berlina Wallace's trial began in April 2018, nearly 3 years after the attack. She pleaded not guilty to both murder and manslaughter, claiming she believed the bottle contained water. However, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of her malicious intent. The acid purchase, the label removal, the internet searches, and her failure to help Mark after the attack. Her defense crumbled under scrutiny. Ultimately, the evidence painted a devastating portrait of cruelty and premeditation. Berlina's calculated actions, chilling detachment, and outright lies left no doubt this was not an accident. It was a brutal, deliberate act. Not only did she intend to harm Mark, Berlina Wallace set out to permanently disfigure him, ensuring no other woman would ever want him again. Witnesses took the stand to describe Berlina's obsessive, controlling, and emotionally abusive behavior, painting a picture of a toxic relationship driven by jealousy and manipulation. Although Mark initially survived the attack, his injuries were catastrophic. Months later, he sought euthanasia. This deeply complicated the case. Prosecutors argued that Berlina's actions directly led to Mark's death, and therefore, she should be charged with murder. But the jury had to weigh a difficult question. Since Mark had chosen to end his life through euthanasia, could her attack alone be considered the sole legal cause of his death? Her defense team argued that since his death was technically voluntary, she could not be held fully responsible. In the end, the jury wasn't convinced that her actions met the legal threshold for either murder or manslaughter. Berlina Wallace was found not guilty on both counts, a decision that shocked many. However, she was convicted of throwing a corrosive substance with intent, a serious charge that carried significant legal consequences. During sentencing, the judge delivered a powerful and chilling statement that captured the cruelty of Berlina's actions and the horror. Mark endured. On the 2nd of September 2015, you purchased a liter of 98% concentrated sulfuric acid. Your intent, if necessary, was to use it against Mark Van Dongen because he had left you for another woman. You removed the label warning of its danger, likely to hide the acid's presence in your home. You waited for the right moment. Mark, wearing only boxer shorts, was asleep in the bed you had once shared, defenseless, almost naked. He awoke too late to react. You targeted his face and body. The burns covered 2/3 of his face, and a large portion of his chest, arms, and thighs. Nearly all the burns were full thickness, affecting 25% of his body. After repeated skin grafts, over 40% of his body was affected. One expert said there was no comparable case involving such extensive chemical burns. He spent 11 months in intensive care. His left leg was amputated. He lost the sight in one eye and suffered severe damage to the other. He endured sepsis, chest infections, kidney failure, gut injuries, internal bleeding, and required the strongest painkillers available, which brought side effects of their own. He was unable to communicate for 4 months. At discharge, he was paralyzed from the neck down and would never have lived independently again. His appearance had been permanently and severely altered. Despite the severity of her actions, Berlina Wallace received a minimum sentence of 12 years in prison. Her conviction brought mixed reactions. Some felt it was at least some form of justice. Others, including Mark's family, were devastated, believing the sentence fell woefully short considering the extent of Mark's suffering. The case also reignited public debate in the UK around acid attacks, leading to increased advocacy for harsher penalties and tighter regulations. This eventually contributed to the introduction of the 2019 Offensive Weapons Act. Case 4. Stephen Beard. On the morning of October 2, 1999, 75-year-old Stephen Beard, a retired TV executive, was jolted awake by unimaginable pain and the horrifying realization that his insides were spilling out of his body. Somehow still conscious, Beard reached for the phone beside his bed and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance," he told the dispatcher. "My guts just jumped out of my stomach. They blew out." "Yeah, they blew out of my stomach. They're lying on my stomach." The dispatcher tried to clarify. "They're laying on your stomach." "I'm in awful pain," Beard groaned. She asked how it happened. "I don't know what happened," he said. "I just woke up. I've never had this happen before." As deputies and paramedics raced to Beard's upscale 5,300 square foot home in Austin's exclusive Toro Canyon neighborhood, he asked the dispatcher to call his wife, Celeste. She was asleep in another wing of the house, but the ringing phone didn't wake her. By the time first responders arrived, the house was locked tight. They had to break through a patio door to reach Beard, who was found bleeding heavily in bed. At first, paramedics believed his hernia incision had somehow ruptured, but something on the bedroom floor told a different story. A freshly fired 20-gauge shotgun shell. Beard was airlifted to Brackenridge Hospital, clinging to life. Celeste and her teenage twin daughters, whom Beard had recently adopted, followed in a police car. While they waited at the hospital, investigators began piecing together the truth. Sheriff's investigator Paul Knight questioned the family. He asked a routine but critical question. "Is there anyone you can think of who might want to hurt Stephen?" Without hesitation, one of the daughter's boyfriends replied, "How about that crazy Tracy?" That crazy Tracy was Tracy, and the more detectives learned about her, the more sense the tip made. Tarleton was a 35-year-old bookstore manager with a troubled past. She had long struggled with substance abuse and mental illness. Though the daughter of a respected Fort Worth attorney and a Texas A&M biology graduate, her adult life was marked by instability and trauma. She had attempted self-harm, suffered several breakdowns, and checked into mental health facilities multiple times, most recently in February 1999. After a violent public breakdown at her workplace. It was during a stay at St. David's Pavilion, a local psychiatric facility, that Tarleton met Celeste Beard. At the time, Celeste was grappling with her own problems, her main source of stress. Spending money, lots of it. Beard had given her a generous $10,000 monthly allowance, but even that wasn't enough. She had 3 walk-in closets full of shoes, each with a matching purse. She once went on a $50,000 shopping spree. She threw lavish parties at a moment's notice. In 1998 alone, she burned through nearly $300,000 just in holiday shopping and entertainment. Beard, who had a net worth of around $12 million, was alarmed. He wasn't a billionaire. The couple had already spent $100,000 on a luxury trip to China the previous year, and his accountant warned that Celeste's spending was out of control. When Beard finally cut off her credit cards, Celeste spiraled. She threatened to take her own life, and Beard, hoping to avoid disaster, paid to have her admitted to St. David's Pavilion. It was there, in the safety of the psych ward, that Celeste and Tracy Tarleton's paths fatally crossed. It was at St. David's Hospital in March 1999, where Celeste Beard first crossed paths with Tracy Tarleton. Tracy was instantly captivated by Celeste, tall, striking, and seductive. Within weeks, she penned a passionate letter. "Celeste, you are so beautiful. I think about your long, silky body and those incredible legs, and I just can't stand it. Then I imagine your gorgeous face, and I want to stand outside your building and wail until I'm arrested. We won't even talk about what happens when. I think about your sweet, tough, sexy voice. So when news broke of Stephen Beard's shooting, Tracy Tarleton's name came up quickly, from multiple sources. Almost everyone pointed to her, except Celeste. Detective Rick Wines paid Tarleton a visit just 2 days after the shooting. We asked if she owned a 20-gauge shotgun. He told CBS's 48 Hours, and she said yes. Tracy, an avid skeet shooter, reluctantly handed over her Italian-made, custom-engraved $1,000 shotgun, a gift from her father. It didn't take long for ballistics to deliver a match. The shell casing recovered from the crime scene was fired from that very shotgun. 2 and 2 has always been 4 to me, Wines said. On October 8th, just 6 days after the attack, Tracy Tarleton was arrested and charged with assault. Against all odds, Stephen Beard began a slow recovery. The shooter had fired poorly in the dark. His vital organs, brain and heart, had been spared, though his digestive system was severely damaged. After 7 surgeries, Beard stabilized and was released from the hospital on January 21, 2000. But 4 days later, he was dead, the result of infection stemming from his injuries. Throughout his final months, Celeste Beard appeared to many as the devoted wife. Friends noted her frequent bedside visits, but even as Stephen lay dying, Celeste found solace in her favorite pastime, shopping. Beard's accountant later testified that Celeste spent $321,000 between October and November 1999, another $249,000 by early December, and $100,000 more by the end of March 2000. Investigators were suspicious. A woman hopelessly in love with Celeste had just shot her husband. Common sense suggested Celeste had orchestrated it, but Tarleton wasn't talking. Prosecutors offered plea deals, but she sat silent, month after month, in her jail cell. The grand jury stayed active for over a year, hoping Tracy would eventually turn on Celeste. She didn't. Finally, on February 16, 2001, Tarleton was indicted for murder. Then, something changed. While in jail, Tracy read a newspaper article that shattered her world. Celeste Beard had moved on and married bartender-musician Cole Johnson in a private Aspen, Colorado ceremony. Furious and betrayed, Tarleton reached out to prosecutors. At last, she said the words they'd waited 18 months to hear. "I did it for Celeste." The wedding to Johnson was Celeste's 5th trip down the aisle, and the one that would unravel everything. Celeste Johnson was raised in Ventura County, California, one of 4 adopted children of Edwin and Nancy Johnson. Her childhood, she later claimed, was filled with trauma. She alleged that her adoptive father began abusing her at age 4, and that her mother was mentally unstable and frequently institutionalized. She also said an older adoptive brother sexually abused her. In her teenage years, Celeste attempted suicide. She became pregnant at 17, married Craig Bratcher, the father of her twin daughters, Christina and Jennifer, but the marriage quickly devolved into violence. Ending in 1983, Celeste was quick to remarry, tying the knot with Air Force mechanic Harold Wolf. That marriage ended in 1991. Afterward, she told friends her divorce lawyer paid for breast implants as a bizarre parting gift. She then moved to Arizona, where she was convicted of insurance fraud after torching a car she had reported stolen, serving 3 months in jail. Husband number 3 was Jimmy Martinez, whom Celeste once joked had a nickname for his anatomy, BMW, Big Mexican Wiener. That relationship also ended, and Celeste moved to Austin, Texas, in her early 30s, by 1993. She was waiting tables at the Austin Country Club, where she met Stephen Beard and his wife, Elise. Elise was a golf enthusiast. Stephen preferred the clubs, indoor amenities, food and drink. Elise was diagnosed with cancer and died on October 13, 1993. Stephen didn't handle loneliness well. Within weeks of Elisa's death, he began pursuing companionship, specifically Celeste. Their first date came less than 3 weeks later, an extravagant Italian dinner, followed by drinks at Beard's mansion. He even let Celeste drive his $50,000 Lexus home. She must have thought, this could work out nicely. Lexus beats BMW. Stephen courted Celeste with money and attention. That first Christmas, he gave her a $116,000 diamond cocktail ring, a $3,000 watch, and a new Ford Explorer. He paid off $20,000 in restitution for her Arizona fraud conviction and funded a custody battle with her ex-husband. After 13 months of dating, Stephen agreed to marry her, but not before she signed a prenuptial agreement on February 8, 1995. If they divorced, she'd get $500,000. If she became his widow, she'd inherit far more. Stephen Beard wasn't naive. He'd earned every penny himself. A Texas native who served in the Navy Air Corps, studied at Texas Christian and Southern Methodist University, and worked his way up from radio to television. By 1985, he became part owner of KBVO in Austin, which later joined the Fox network. He sold his share in 1994 for a small fortune. Celeste and Stephen married on February 18, 1995, at the Austin Country Club. Their honeymoon included a medical complication. Stephen used penis injection medication, which Celeste found traumatizing. According to her, they had sex only twice, once when she moved in, and again on their wedding night. The marriage struggled from the start. Within 4 months, Stephen filed for divorce, citing lack of intimacy. But he withdrew the petition after Celeste proposed what she later called the oral sex solution. From then on, Sunday mornings were reserved for keeping Stephen satisfied. "I gotta go make some money," she would tell her daughters. Celeste made sure there were no interruptions as she strolled seductively toward her husband's den for their scheduled weekly intimacy. Doors were locked, phones disconnected. Wanted Stephen to reach his happy ending with no distractions. According to Susie Spencer's The Fortune Hunter, Celeste hated starting over once she got going, but once their sexual arrangement was established, money quickly became the main source of conflict in their relationship. The $500,000 clause in the prenuptial agreement was a sore point for Celeste. One day Beard decided to hand it over, possibly thinking she'd spend less of his money if she had some of her own. He was mistaken. The $500,000 vanished within 6 months. After the money was gone, Celeste became increasingly vocal about her disdain for her older, heavier husband. According to her daughters and friends, she often referred to him as the fat bastard or the old fool. More than once, she was overheard saying bitterly, "Why doesn't he just die already?" Celeste began spending more and more time at Beard's weekend house on the Pedernales River, about 40 miles northwest of Austin. She also reignited a relationship with her ex-husband, Jimmy Martinez. Her daughters would later disclose that she often slipped out of the house after Beard went to bed at 9:30 p.m., sometimes accelerating the process by lacing his food or drinks with crushed sleeping pills. Once he was out cold, she'd sneak away to see Martinez or party with her favorite drinking buddy, Donna Goodson, a local beauty salon receptionist. But Beard eventually caught on. After New Year's in 1999, he confronted Celeste about her spiraling spending and her ongoing affair with Martinez. He even hinted at a divorce. After 5 years of a lavish lifestyle filled with champagne and diamonds, Celeste couldn't imagine returning to her past a life marked by burned cars and food stamps. Even the prenuptial money was gone. When confronted, she threatened suicide and was admitted to St. David's Pavilion for psychiatric care. Her daughters were skeptical. Christina summed it up. What she wanted was money without the burden of a husband, while at St. David's, Celeste took the first dangerous step toward getting what she wanted. She met Tracy Tarleton, Celeste and Tracy were later transferred to Timberlawn, a mental health facility in Dallas, where their connection deepened into something more. Despite staff efforts to keep them apart, their relationship turned sexual. Celeste was extremely flirtatious with me from the beginning, Tarleton told CBS. Eventually she came into my room and kissed me. The two women first had sex on March 20, 1999. Their intimate relationship continued until October 1st, the day before Beard was shot. Their affair wasn't subtle. A photo from a book about the case shows Celeste sitting on Tarleton's lap at a party. Witnesses said they frequently saw the two women kissing. Tracy wasn't secretive, said Jeremy Ellis, a co-worker of Tarleton's. Everyone at the store knew she was dating someone named Celeste. Celeste sent Tarleton birthday cards addressed to the one I love, and the women were regulars at a Red Roof Inn in Austin. However, in July, they attended a counseling session with psychotherapist Barbara Grant about their sexual relationship. Celeste told Grant she doubted she was a lesbian, claiming she needed alcohol to work up the nerve to have sex with Tarleton. Even her daughters caught them in bed at least twice and found books about lesbian sex around the house. When confronted, Celeste dismissed it, saying, "Tracy's a lesbian and she's in love with me, isn't that funny?" But it wasn't a joke. Christina later signed an affidavit stating, "My mother has acknowledged to me that she is involved in a romantic relationship with Tracy Tarleton and that they have had sexual relations." Tracy herself confirmed the relationship to Christina, and the two were seen kissing passionately in September 1999, once even by Stephen Beard himself. Just days later, he threw Tarleton out of the house. Tarleton, it turns out, had her own psychological wounds. Therapist Susan Milhighland said that Tarleton had a pattern of falling hard for unavailable married women. To Tarleton, Stephen Beard was the one thing standing in the way of her dream life with Celeste. As their affair intensified, Celeste began painting Beard as abusive, claiming he belittled and emotionally tormented her. She even said she feared he would assault her if she asked for a divorce. Tarleton, completely enmeshed in her fantasy of rescuing Celeste, became willing to do anything. Together, they began brainstorming ways to kill Beard. Their attempts could have filled a season of a crime drama. They let food rot in hopes of producing homemade botulism, sprinkled it on a chili dog Beard actually enjoyed, spiked his drinks with 190 proof grain alcohol, and placed a plastic bag over his head while he slept. They even slipped him sleeping pills, and once dosed him with 10 ecstasy tablets. Somehow, he survived it all. As a trip to Europe loomed in late September, Celeste convinced Tarleton through a fit of melodramatics that her life was in danger. She came over and was just hysterical, Tarleton told CBS. She said, "I'll never survive this trip. I wanted to help her. That help came in the form of a shotgun." Celeste set the scene. Beard was asleep, the doors were unlocked, and she was in another wing of the house. Tarleton slipped in, fired a single shot, and the dark hand vanished. But the plan was doomed. Half of Austin knew Celeste was involved with a woman who owned a shotgun. After Tarleton's arrest, the two continued speaking by phone during the 9 months Tarleton spent in jail, but their bond began to unravel. As Celeste became increasingly erratic, the relationship ended. Celeste started going bananas, hysterical a lot of the time, Tarleton said. "We both said, we're not going to do this anymore. You won't see me again." Tarleton was devastated and reportedly attempted to take her own life. Despite being under the influence of Valium, Tracy Tarleton initially refused to implicate Celeste in Steve Beard's murder. But everything changed a few weeks after their breakup, when she read a newspaper article. It said Celeste had married Cole Johnson on July 3, 2000, just days after ending things with Tarleton. The betrayal was clear. "She's off on her honeymoon in Aspen," Tarleton told CBS. "Even I couldn't overlook that." The article became the moment everything began to unravel for her. Suddenly, it all clicked. Celeste had lied. The man she claimed was abusive had been her financial target all along. Their relationship, Tracy realized, had been nothing more than a performance. Soon after, Tarleton sat down with detectives and prosecutors and told them everything. Celeste was arrested on March 28, 2002, and formally charged with her former husband's murder. A judge set her bail at a staggering $8 million, noting she had earned around $2 million after selling their mini-mansion just months after Steve Beard's death. Her attorney insisted she only had $7,295 in her accounts. But Celeste's legal troubles weren't over. A few months later, she was indicted again, this time for attempting to hire her friend, Donna Goodson, to kill Tracy Tarleton at trial. Prosecutor Allison Wetzel painted a clear picture for the jury. This is a simple case of greed. A manipulative defendant who took advantage of a mentally ill woman who loved her. Celeste, the prosecution argued, despised Steve Beard. She'd talked often about how he disgusted her. She told Tracy that once Steve was gone, they could finally be together. Tracy Tarleton took the stand for a total of 15 hours across 3 days. She recounted their affair, the plan, and ultimately, the shooting. "I just saw this woman I loved, desperate to escape a man she claimed was awful," she said. "She wanted me to shoot him at Toro Canyon, and I did." Tarleton told jurors that she and Steve Beard had been betrayed by the same person. Friends, co-workers, mental health professionals, and others testified they believed the relationship between Celeste and Tarleton was real and sexual. Prosecutors produced photos, handwritten notes, cards, and even entries from Tracy's journal to support their claim. Still, Celeste's high-profile attorney, Dick DeGuerin, dismissed it all as delusions. "This is a fatal attraction fantasy," he said. "Tracy Tarleton is psychotic, diagnosed with delusions, hallucinations, and paranoid thoughts." During a pre-trial deposition, Celeste flatly denied even kissing Tracy. That denial, when read aloud in court, stood in stark contrast to testimony from over a dozen witnesses, including the most devastating of all her twin daughters. Over 3 days, Christina and Jennifer testified. She married Steve for his money. Jennifer said plainly. Christina added, "She used to say, 'Why? Doesn't he just die already?'" Their testimony revealed chilling details, including what they called the Sunday suck, a sexual ritual Celeste performed for Beard. "What was the Sunday suck?" asked Prosecutor Wetzel. Jennifer answered, "Giving Steve a slop toppy." Celeste would then run off to see Tarleton or her other lover, Jimmy Martinez. But the most shocking moment came in a recording made by daughter Christina in 1999, where Celeste screamed at her children during a breakdown. "I was depressed, you goddamn little bankers." Forensic accountants detailed her extravagant lifestyle, a prenuptial agreement, and the millions she stood to inherit if Steve died. Prosecutor Wetzel summed it up. "This entire case is about money." The jury deliberated for 23 hours, over 3 days, before returning with a guilty verdict. Though prosecutors didn't seek the death penalty, the conviction came with a mandatory life sentence. During the sentencing, Steve Beard's loved ones were allowed to speak. "I hope you burn in hell," said Beard's son, Steve Beard III. But it was Celeste's own daughter Christina whose words struck hardest. "You say, we turned on you. No. You turned on us. You turned on the entire Beard family. He let you into his home. He loved you. He honored and obeyed you. And you violated him. You murdered him. Shame on you." By Texas law, Celeste must serve a minimum of 40 years before she's eligible for parole. She won't be eligible until she's 80. Tracy Tarleton, the shooter, received a reduced 20-year sentence in exchange for her testimony, and was released on parole in August 2011. She now lives in San Antonio. Celeste never got the fortune she anticipated. Steve Beard's estate went to his biological children, and also to Christina and Jennifer, his adopted daughters. In television interviews, Celeste continues to deny any role in the murder. She accuses her daughters of turning on her for financial gain. The only reason they could have lied is for the money. She said in an interview with CBS, "They had 2 million reasons to betray me." Celeste did walk away with a 6-figure sum after the court-ordered sale of jointly owned property, most of which went to her legal team. Until at least 2043, her shopping sprees will be limited to prison commissary items. Case 5. The Tragedy of Parvezan, 1983. In the Punjab region of Pakistan, a young woman named Parvez was known for her academic brilliance and exceptional command of English. Her dream was simple but powerful. She wanted to become a teacher, but Parvez's future was not her own to decide. Her father arranged a marriage for her with a well-settled Sikh man living in Canada, believing it would provide her with a secure life. Parvez was devastated. She didn't want to get married, she wanted to teach. Still, out of duty to her family, she went through with the marriage and moved to Canada. At first, things seemed stable. Her husband was kind, and she slowly adjusted to her new life. But before long, his true personality surfaced. He pressured her to work, prioritizing money over their marriage. Parvez took a job on a mushroom farm, a far cry from the classroom she had once dreamed of. On July 20th, 1985, she gave birth to a daughter, Harriet. She hoped the baby might bring peace. But just 6 months later, her husband demanded she return to work, forcing her into a factory job. Despite fragile health, Parvez became pregnant again and gave birth to another daughter in 1988. Life became a relentless cycle of labor, illness, and neglect. Eventually, the marriage turned violent. During one heated argument, her husband physically assaulted her. That moment was a turning point. Parvez bravely went to the police and filed a report. Her husband was jailed for a week. When he returned, he appeared to have checked her with care, trying to rebuild what was broken. But this newfound peace would not last. Suddenly, Parvez's health began to deteriorate rapidly. She suffered from intense, unexplained pain all over her body and was plagued by blinding headaches. Desperate, she began taking painkillers just to function. But the pain grew, where screams of agony could be heard from their home. Then one day, she experienced something terrifying. An electric shock-like sensation surged through her teeth, spine, arms, and legs. And that was just the beginning of what would become an unspeakable decline. Her body twisted uncontrollably, bending in ways that defied nature, like a bow being drawn too far. The terrifying sight left her second daughter paralyzed with fear as she watched her mother writhe in agony. Overwhelmed by panic and desperation, the young girl bolted from the house, frantically calling for help from neighbors. A small group rushed in, only to be met with a nightmarish scene. Parvez lay contorted on the floor, her limbs jerking, her face distorted by pain. The horror struck them all silent. Not one of them knew what to do. Word of Parvez's condition reached her husband, and for the first time, he appeared visibly shattered. Moved in a way no one had seen before, he rushed to the kitchen and brought her a glass of water, while neighbors tried in vain to calm her convulsing body. Without hesitation, they transported her to the nearest hospital. There, a team of doctors quickly gathered, but their efforts were met with confusion. None of the tests explained her violent symptoms. No cause could be identified for the pain and seizures ravaging her body. As her condition continued to decline, doctors made the difficult decision to place her on life support, clinging to the hope of finding a cure. But despite exhaustive efforts, there was nothing more they could do. On February 3rd, just 3 days after being admitted, Parvez tragically passed away. Her death left behind a storm of unanswered questions, heartbreak, and lingering guilt. Her family and in-laws struggled to comprehend how such a sudden and brutal decline could happen. In a troubling revelation, her husband mentioned that Parvez had recently been suffering from intense headaches and had been prescribed medication. He feared that the medication may have triggered her mysterious and fatal reaction. But was this really just a tragic side effect? Or was there something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Let's go back specifically to what happened nearly a year and a half after Parvez's unexplained death. June 23, 1988. Hamilton Ranjit Singh was enjoying an ordinary evening at home with his wife, Laquinder Kaur. After dinner, Laquinder was in the kitchen tidying up, while Ranjit relaxed on the living room sofa, watching TV. But the calm was abruptly shattered by a blood-curdling scream. Laquinder raced into the living room, panic rising in her chest. What she saw froze her in place. Ranjit's body was contorted in unnatural ways, his limbs flailing as though fighting off something invisible. His face was twisted in agony. He screamed in pain, and she stood paralyzed, helpless, and horrified. What could cause such a terrifying episode? Was there a connection to Parvez's strange death, or was this something entirely different? Shaking with fear, Laquinder tried to support her husband, but he was too heavy. She quickly called emergency services. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived and rushed Ranjit to the hospital. Doctors ran urgent tests, but just like with Parvez, the results revealed nothing unusual. No injuries, no apparent illnesses. They suspected a heart attack, but couldn't confirm it. Ranjit's sudden collapse and death devastated those close to him, especially his close friend and business partner, Sukhwinder Singh. The two had shared not just a business, but a bond of trust and loyalty. With Ranjit gone, Sukhwinder was left reeling and now had to shoulder the future of their shared enterprise. But as the dust settled from the funeral, a surprising detail emerged. An unusual insurance policy. Before his death, Ranjit and Sukhwinder had taken out a joint life insurance policy worth 2 lakh rupees. The policy had a peculiar clause. If one of them died, the other would receive the full payout. It was designed to protect their business from collapsing in case of tragedy. Now, with Ranjit deceased, the money was due to Sukhwinder Singh, but before it could be released, the insurance company required a full investigation to rule out any foul play. That's when Cliff Elliott, the company's claim investigator, entered the picture. He traveled to Hamilton to verify the documents and meet with Sukhwinder Singh in person. Everything in the paperwork appeared legitimate, clean signatures, valid dates, nothing out of order. But during the visit, something on the living room wall caught Cliff's eye. A framed photograph of Guru Nanak, prominently displayed. It looked familiar, eerily so. Cliff's mind flashed back to another case from over a year ago, a woman named Parvez who had died under equally mysterious circumstances. He remembered visiting her home and noticing an identical framed photo of Guru Nanak in the same frame, hanging in the same manner. And then, it hit him. Parvez's husband, the beneficiary of her life insurance, had been none other than Sukhwinder Singh. Now, here he was again, claiming insurance after the suspicious death of his business partner. 2 sudden deaths, 2 large insurance payouts. One man at the center of both. Cliff Elliott's suspicions skyrocketed. He immediately contacted the Hamilton police and laid out his findings. The pattern was too disturbing to ignore. In just 18 months, Sukhwinder Singh had lost 2 close individuals under similar, mysterious conditions, and received large insurance settlements each time. The police launched a formal investigation. As they dug deeper, what they uncovered was far more chilling than anyone could have expected. More deaths, more secrets. While investigating the deaths of Parvez and Ranjit, authorities discovered that 3 more mysterious deaths were linked to Sukhwinder Singh. But the most shocking turn was yet to come. As the Hamilton detectives reviewed his history, they noticed a troubling pattern. Sukhwinder had traveled to India, frequently, often right around the time of these suspicious deaths. His travel logs, expenses, and communication records painted a murky picture. To pursue the lead, Hamilton police reached out to their counterparts in Punjab, India. The 2 agencies began collaborating closely, determined to uncover the truth. And that's when another bombshell dropped. Just 9 weeks after Parvez's death, Sukhwinder Singh had remarried. His new wife, a woman named Sarv, From a small village in Punjab, Sukhwinder Singh Dhillon's deceptive journey began in the village of Panchgrain, near Jalandhar. After one of his marriages, he told people he was returning to Canabet. He never did. Instead, he married yet another woman, Kuljit Sam from Kupa. His true motive behind these marriages soon became clear: financial gain. Each union was a calculated move to collect large dowries from unsuspecting families. Sukhwinder moved between India and Canada regularly, targeting women and their families under the guise of marriage, only to exploit them for money. Disturbingly, 2 marriages weren't enough for him. In every case, he promised his brides a luxurious life in Canada in exchange for massive dowries. But his interest was never love-only wealth. As police delved into his background deeply, unsettling details emerged, especially regarding his second wife, Sarah. She had given birth to twin boys, Gurmit and Gerber. Both infants tragically died just 12 days after birth. When questioned, Sarah explained that the babies had suddenly developed unusual symptoms and rapidly deteriorated without any clear cause. This eerie tragedy echoed earlier mysterious deaths tied to Sukhwinder, his first wife, and his Canadian business partner Rajneer. But the trail of death didn't end there. His third wife, Kuljit Singh, also died under suspicious circumstances. Neighbors reported that in the days leading up to her death, Kuljit displayed strange physical symptoms, unusual movements, and unexplained distress. Despite the odd circumstances, her family declined a post-mortem and rushed to perform her last rites. A chilling pattern began to emerge. All 3 women had reportedly been in good health, yet all died suddenly and mysteriously, with 5 deaths occurring within just 17 months. Investigators began to suspect something far more sinister. The investigation took a dark turn when police exhumed the burial site of the twin boys. Their remains were sent to the Toronto Forensic Science Center. At the same time, toxicology reports from the deaths of Sukhwinder's first wife and business partner were re-examined. What they uncovered was horrifying. All victims had been poisoned with the same lethal substance. Tracing the poison's origin, investigators identified a specific tree whose seeds Sukhwinder had used to manufacture a deadly concoction. He ground the seeds into powder and pressed them into pills, disguising them as health supplements or strength boosters. Under this ruse, he fed the pills to his business partner, pretending it was a remedy for fatigue, and to his wives, as supposed treatments for minor ailments. But the most chilling revelation was yet to come. Investigators discovered that Sukhwinder had ordered his second wife to give the same pills to their infant sons. He told her the pills would strengthen the babies and boost their health. In reality, he had sentenced them to death. Despite the overwhelming forensic evidence, justice seemed elusive. In India, no formal complaint or first information report was ever filed concerning the deaths of the twins or there was no investigation, no trial. Similarly, Canadian authorities failed to pursue legal action against Sukhwinder for the poisonings of his first wife and business partner, even though forensic science directly implicated him in both murders. For years, Sukhwinder Singh Dhillon managed to evade accountability, manipulating the legal gaps between 2 countries. But in 1997, the law finally caught up to him. He was arrested at his workshop, and under intense interrogation, he eventually broke down and confessed to his crimes. Following a long and complex trial, on August 1, 2001, Sukhwinder was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years. His time behind bars mirrored the misery he had inflicted on others. On November 16, 2013, Sukhwinder died in a hospital. While some reports claimed cancer as the cause, others speculated it was a sudden illness. Either way, his life ended in the same shadowy silence that had defined his crimes. The case gripped media attention across both India and Canada. Forensic reports, trial proceedings, and emotional family interviews dominated headlines. A best-selling book based on the investigation went on to win multiple awards. And in 2003, The story was adapted into a critically acclaimed film, with several more adaptations following in its wake. Sukhwinder later admitted that greed was the only motive behind the killings. He revealed he murdered for financial gain, including insurance payouts, ranging from $100,000 to $200,000. His indifference to human life was summed up in a single, heartless comment about his twin sons. He didn't want the burden of raising children interfering with his pursuit of wealth. Money was his only obsession, and he stopped at nothing to get it. Sharon Pryor had always done her best to steer clear of trouble and avoid bad influences. Sadly, even that wasn't enough to protect her from the brutal encounter with true evil that would end her life far too soon. It was 1975, and for the Pryor family, life was unfolding as usual. 16-year-old Sharon, like most teenagers, faced the typical ups and downs of adolescence. She adored trendy music and fashionable clothes, though her parents didn't always approve of her choices. She had also recently started dating a boy named John, or JN, who had been in love with her since the 4th grade. After years of friendship and longing, he had finally won Sharon's heart, and the two began dating. They often spent time with friends and seemed like the perfect young couple. Their relationship was wholesome and genuine, so much so that even Sharon's parents supported it. According to her mother, there were never any serious arguments between them. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and open communication, surrounded by love, support, and good influences. No one could have imagined that Sharon's life was about to be tragically cut short. March 29, 1975, began like any other spring Saturday. Sharon had breakfast while her mother stepped out to shop for Easter groceries and gifts. When she returned, Sharon helped her unpack the bags. That day was meant to be of the family were coming over for dinner, including a boy named Stephen and Sharon's boyfriend, John. Sharon spent most of the day painting Easter eggs and preparing for the holiday. Stephen arrived early and played with Sharon's younger brother. Later, Sharon and Stephen planned to stop by the local sports association. In addition to sports, the organization also ran a needlework program and had a tradition of awarding a jacket known as the Leo, named in memory of a founder who had died of leukemia. This jacket was more than just a piece of clothing. It symbolized dedication and effort. Children had to earn it by selling raffle tickets. Sharon had worked hard to meet the requirement and was eager to collect the reward she'd earned. But when she arrived at the association, she was disappointed to learn there were no jackets available in her size. Still, she didn't let it ruin her spirits and decided she would pick it up another time. She and Stephen returned home, and Sharon rejoined her family in holiday preparations. As evening fell and guests arrived, the Pryors enjoyed a warm, festive dinner together. Sharon and her mother later hid painted eggs around the house for the younger children to find. Then, Sharon asked for permission to go to the local Marina Pizzeria, popular hangout for teens, just a short walk from home. She'd been allowed to go many times before, and her mother saw no reason to say no this time. Around 6 p.m., a neighborhood girl dropped by. She chatted with Sharon as she got ready to go out. Sharon borrowed one of her mother's sweaters and slipped on her favorite suede jacket. At 6:30 p.m., the girls left the house together, but the neighbor girl soon changed her mind about going and turned back. Sharon continued on her own toward the pizzeria. A group of her friends had already gathered there, waiting for her, but Sharon never showed up. At first, they assumed she might be walking around with her boyfriend John, so they continued enjoying their evening. Meanwhile, John and a few friends were at home watching a hockey game. When the game ended, they too headed to the pizzeria, expecting to see Sharon. But she wasn't there and hadn't been seen since school. Her absence was alarming. Sharon was known for being punctual and responsible when she still hadn't returned by late evening. Her mother, though worried, told herself Sharon had simply lost track of time. She stayed up, watching television and glancing out the window, hoping to see her daughter's familiar figure coming down the street. But the hours dragged on. By midnight, anxiety had given way to fear. Still, it felt too late to call around. The helpless mother waited until morning, calling Sharon's friends one by one, desperate to learn if anyone had seen or heard from her. But no one had, not even John. Soon, the full scope of the situation became clear. Sharon had never arrived at the pizzeria at all. The neighborhood girl who left the house with her confirmed that they parted ways on the street, and Sharon continued on alone. Then came more disturbing news. A girl named Mary, Sharon's close friend, told her mother that shortly after 7 p.m., another girl, 23-year-old Cheryl Roy, had been attacked near the pizzeria. A man had lunged at her with a knife. Luckily, passersby heard her screams and intervened, scaring him off. Witnesses described the assailant as tall, dark-haired, with blue eyes, a mustache, and a calm, quiet voice. He wore a ski jacket, blue jeans, and pointed-toe shoes. That description, and the timing and location of the attack, matched Sharon's route exactly. Panic surged through Sharon's mother. She rushed to the police, though they refused to draw immediate conclusions. They took the matter seriously and initiated a large-scale search operation. Hundreds of locals joined the effort, armed with flyers and Sharon's photos. Her mother even appeared on local TV, pleading for help, her voice trembling with hope and desperation. But the search turned up nothing. No signs of Sharon, no leads, no suspects. Police, though outwardly supportive, privately feared the worst. The critical 48-hour window was closing fast. There was no reason to believe Sharon had run away. She had no conflicts at home, no school trouble, and her relationship with John was strong. She had no known enemies and wasn't involved in any risky behavior, and yet she was gone. The man who attacked Cheryl Roy had vanished without a trace. 3 days later, on the morning of April 1st, Sharon's mother awoke around 6 a.m. Looking out the window, she saw something strange. A young man had come out of Sharon's friend's house across the street. He crossed over, picked up the newspaper from the Pryor family's doorstep, and began walking away. Something about it struck her as wrong. She rushed outside, calling out to the man. Instead of responding, he quickened his pace. The frantic mother chased him down and grabbed the newspaper. He resisted, but she managed to tear it from his hands. "Don't look at that," the man shouted, trying to shield her eyes, but it was too late. On the front page of the morning newspaper was a photo of a girl's lifeless body found in the snow, just minutes away from their quiet suburban neighborhood. The woman froze, horrified, not only by the gruesome discovery, but by the fact that she hadn't been notified by the police, even though she should have been. Her neighbors had already seen the news. Desperate for reassurance, she tried convincing herself it wasn't her daughter. Sharon, maybe just a girl who resembled her. Once she managed to compose herself, she called the police to dispel the awful suspicion. They told her the victim had not yet been formally identified and asked her to come in. But the woman was too terrified to face the possibility. Instead, she asked her ex-husband to go in her place. The entire neighborhood was stunned. The girl in the photograph looked just like Sharon, and her clothes matched the exact description the mother had given to police. Tragically, the father confirmed the truth. The deceased was indeed their 16-year-old daughter. Sharon's body had been discovered by a local man who recognized her from news reports about her disappearance. He had gone outside and noticed something unusual. The lock to his property had been broken, yet nothing appeared stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry, almost as if the person had used a key. Then, in his driveway, he saw a girl's half-naked body. She was clothed only from the waist up, wearing a suede jacket and blue sweater. Her jeans were found nearby, and her underwear was hanging from a tree. Her mouth had been taped shut, and the tape was so chewed it was tangled in her hair. She had fought desperately to remove it, even clenching it in her hand. Tracks in the snow showed Sharon had tried to get up, The killer had left her there alive, to die slowly in the freezing cold. She didn't have the strength to survive. Police quickly launched a murder investigation. The brutality shocked even the most experienced officers. Sharon had been beaten severely, her body covered in bruises, hemorrhaging, and stab wounds. Her ribs were crushed, as if someone had knelt on her chest. Her jaw was broken on both sides, her nose smashed, and one cheek was torn where a tooth had been knocked out. The medical examiner determined she had been held captive for days, from Saturday until Tuesday, and subjected to repeated abuse and rape. She had died from strangulation and internal injuries, including a severe head wound near her body. Investigators found more evidence, tire tracks about 50 feet away, and a faint trail of blood droplets leading from the tracks to her final resting place. Since there were no signs of dragging, detectives believed she'd been carried from a vehicle. Her socks and shoes were clean, confirming she hadn't crawled. There was also a man's shirt nearby, apparently used to bind her wrists. A clear shoe print was found by the gatepost. Even more chilling was a receipt for the Leo brand jacket Sharon had ordered but never lived to wear. The town mourned. Hundreds gathered at the local Presbyterian church to say goodbye to Sharon. Her mother, paralyzed by grief, could barely stand. All she could think of was seeing her daughter's killer brought to justice. Tragically, Sharon's brutal death wasn't the first or the last to rock Canada. Just a year earlier, on July 9th, 1974, 12-year-old Norma O'Brien had been found murdered under eerily similar circumstances. She'd gone out to play water polo, but found the pool closed. She turned back and never made it home. Her parents, refusing to believe she'd run away, reported her missing that night. The next day, her mutilated body was found half naked in a field near the pool, like Sharon. Norma had been raped, beaten, and strangled. The sites of both attacks were only a 30-minute drive apart. Police feared they were dealing with a serial predator, but they had no suspects. Then, on June 23, 1975, the same year, Sharon was murdered. Another girl disappeared in St. Stephen. 14-year-old Debbie Fisher was riding home on a red bicycle, holding a bottle of milk. She never arrived. Her body was discovered in the woods the next day, naked and bludgeoned. This time, the killer was caught. A 17-year-old boy confessed. As a minor, his identity was protected. He described how he'd seen Debbie cycling home and, on a sinister whim, decided to attack. He pretended to cry on the curb, luring her close. When she approached, he grabbed her, smashed the milk bottle, and struck her with a rock. She lost consciousness. He tried to rape her, but failed, and in frustration, struck her again, killing her. He then hid her bicycle in the bushes and stashed her body in an abandoned car. During questioning, the teen also admitted to killing Norma O'Brien the previous year, but insisted he had nothing to do with Sharon's murder. Investigators confirmed his alibi and ruled him out as a suspect. He was convicted for the murders of Debbie and Norma, but, due to his age, received only a few years in detention. He now lives and works in Montreal. Despite the mountain of evidence left at the scene of Sharon's death, the tire tracks, shirt, shoe print, and receipt, her killer was never found. Police initially believed the case would be solved within days, but 13 months passed without a single solid suspect. Officers interviewed 38 individuals connected to Sharon. 6 were detained based on witness descriptions, including Frank Daly, the manager of the local pizzeria Sharon had planned to visit, but, without evidence, they were all released. Her friends were investigated too, but all had verifiable alibis. Some were at the pizzeria, others at home watching sports. Eventually, the case went cold. Tips dried up. Leads turned into dead ends. Everyone, it seemed, had given up. Everyone, except Sharon's mother, refusing to accept that her daughter's killer could simply vanish. She continued her own search. clinging to the hope that one day, some detail, some overlooked clue, would finally bring justice. That evening, it was clear Sharon couldn't have gone far from her home. Around the same time she set off for the pizzeria. One of their neighbors was returning from work walking the same familiar route he'd taken every day for years. But on that ill-fated day, the man claimed he hadn't seen Sharon at all, since Sharon never made it to Marina's house. Investigators believed she must have been intercepted almost immediately after parting ways with her friend. The perpetrator had a remarkably narrow window of opportunity, but used it with chilling precision. The abduction happened so swiftly and so silently that no one saw a thing. Not a single credible witness ever came forward. It was as if the crime had been executed to perfection. Sharon's devastated mother believed it was necessary to take a closer look at the residents of their own street. Someone might have seen a suspicious stranger or perhaps recognized him. Worse yet, what if the attacker wasn't a stranger at all? What if he lived right there, among them? Detectives leaned toward the theory that the rapist and killer was likely a younger man, possibly still living with his parents. They suspected deep psychological issues, perverse and violent, fantasies that may have triggered uncontrollable rage toward women. Police also considered that this crime likely wasn't his first, and if he wasn't stopped, it wouldn't be his last. Adding weight to this fear was another disturbing event. Around the same time, another girl named Cheryl had been attacked by a man wielding a knife. That attack had been thwarted by passersby, forcing the assailant to flee. Witnesses were able to provide a verbal sketch of the man, but despite law enforcement's efforts, he was never identified. The idea that two sadistic predators could be operating at the same time in one of the city's quietest neighborhoods was almost unthinkable. Investigators began to suspect that Cheryl's attacker and Sharon's killer were one and the same. The perpetrator's behavior revealed a terrifying level of control. He moved through the neighborhood unnoticed, left no clear trace, and aroused no suspicion. It was clear he knew the area well. Detectives agreed with Sharon's mother. This man most likely lived nearby. Profilers described him as sadistic. People like him often follow predictable behavioral patterns. At first, they appear charming, drawing in trusting victims. But once they've lured someone in, the mask slips. Control turns into humiliation. Then the abuse escalates. This is how such men often treat their romantic partners. But eventually, it's not enough. They evolve into predators stalking new, often younger prey. With this profile in mind, police began methodically checking all residents in the area who had prior convictions for harassment, sexual assault, or domestic violence. Their top priority, however, was identifying the knife-wielding man who attacked Cheryl. He matched their profile almost exactly: socially withdrawn, low intelligence, no stable life path, and a preference for violence over conversation. His psychological footprint was unmistakable, and it had been imprinted on Sharon's mutilated body. The savage beatings suggested he was a man used to getting what he wanted, not through persuasion, but by brute force. He was impulsive, unable to regulate his rage, and prone to instant, explosive violence. What scared investigators most was the growing realization that they were likely dealing with a serial killer, one who was still out there, and likely to strike again. At that time, however, law enforcement lacked many of the modern tools that would have helped them make a breakthrough. There were no surveillance cameras on every street, no phone tracking, no geolocation technology. DNA analysis was in its infancy. Investigators were working blind, often slowly and inefficiently, and the killer was using that to his advantage. 6 years after Sharon's brutal murder, he struck again. This time, the victim was 12-year-old Tammy Leakey. Her death marked a terrifying escalation. The killer was now targeting small children, young, defenseless girls. On March 20th, 1981, Tammy was visiting her grandmother. The elderly woman, unwell that day, asked Tammy to go to the store just a few blocks away, but the girl never returned. Her mother, walking home, spotted Tammy's glasses lying abandoned on the sidewalk. Panicked, she immediately called the police. A witness later reported seeing a man in a beige raincoat jump out of a small red car and forcibly shove a screaming girl inside. That same evening, a call came into the local police station. A man had found something horrifying. Tammy's battered body lay naked on the ground, partially covered by her own clothes. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but her injuries were too severe. She had been strangled to death. Although there were no signs of rape, male DNA was found on her clothing just like in Sharon's case. The killer had acted more carelessly this time, leaving behind more physical evidence. But still, none of it brought the investigation closer to a resolution. The case stalled. Around this same time, attacks on young girls were happening in neighboring parts of Canada. In Montreal in 1978, 17-year-old Lisa Blaze was found dead just meters from her own home. She'd been returning from a night out at a local disco when she was struck on the head, raped, and killed. Like Sharon and Tammy's cases, Lisa's murder remains unsolved. There were so many similar cases unfolding across Canada that police were overwhelmed in certain which, if any, were truly connected. In the year 2000, nearly 25 years after her daughter's murder, Sharon's mother made one more desperate plea. She asked investigators to reopen the case and re-examine the evidence using modern forensic technology. DNA testing had come a long way and she was convinced that a new analysis could finally bring her daughter justice. But when the letter arrived in the mail a week later, it held a devastating answer. The news struck her to the core. Most of the physical evidence collected back in 1975, the year Sharon was killed, had mysteriously vanished. Only a few items had survived: Sharon's clothing and the shirt worn by the alleged suspect. Forensic experts closely examined the man's shirt and managed to extract a DNA sample that did not belong to Sharon. However, a search through national DNA databases yielded no match. The unidentified biological material was carefully preserved, in hopes that it could one day be matched with a future suspect. That preserved trace would later become the key to solving the haunting case. In June 2004, police received a tip about a garage where Sharon might have been held captive. Detectives searched the location thoroughly, but no evidence was found linking it to the crime. 3 DNA samples were collected from the site, but none matched either Sharon or the unknown sample found on the suspect's shirt. With no solid leads, investigators were once again at a standstill. Then, in 2012, the case took an unexpected turn. An anonymous donor offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could help identify the person responsible for the brutal murders of 2 young girls. This gesture suggested that police had new information, though none of it was made public. A special hotline was set up, encouraging the public to call in with tips, theories, or any suspicions. Despite the renewed attention, no breakthroughs emerged. Investigators turned once again to the surviving victim, Cheryl, the girl who had fought off a knife-wielding attacker years earlier and managed to get a good look at his face. She agreed to undergo a hypnosis session to recover additional details. While under hypnosis, she was shown photographs of various suspects, including Canadian serial killer William Patrick. Cheryl identified him as bearing a strong resemblance to her attacker. William Patrick had been convicted in Montreal for the murders of 5 women, although he claimed to have killed at least 9. Investigators had long suspected his involvement in the child murders, but he denied any connection, insisting his first killing occurred in 1979, 4 years after Sharon was murdered. With no physical evidence linking him to Sharon's case, the theory remained speculative. Police also considered another suspect, Mike French, a member of the violent motorcycle gang the Satans. In 1975, when Sharon was killed, French lived in the same area. He later relocated with his parents. Acquaintances described him as volatile and cruel, capable of murder. Some even claimed to have overheard him brag about killing Sharon, but that lead, too, ended in disappointment. French was gunned down in 1982 during a gang conflict, taking any secrets he may have had to the grave. His own murder remains unsolved to this day. None of these avenues led to a solid conclusion. The Pryor family was devastated by what they saw as investigative incompetence. They vowed never to stop seeking justice for Sharon's mother. This wasn't just a fight for her daughter. It was a mission to protect all children from such cruelty and to hold predators accountable. In 2019, Sharon's mother participated in a television program alongside 9 other grieving families. They publicly accused police of mishandling the investigations into their children's deaths. Law enforcement declined to appear on the show. Finally, in June 2022, a long-awaited breakthrough came. Thanks to advancements in genetic genealogy, experts discovered a match between the old DNA sample found on the suspect's shirt and a genetic profile in a public database. The match led to Franklin Ramini, a man who had died under suspicious circumstances back in 1982. Ramini's remains were exhumed for testing on May 23, 2023. The DNA results conclusively linked him to the biological material found at the crime scene. His appearance matched the witness description, and he had lived near the location where Sharon was abducted. Investigators also confirmed that the tire tracks near Sharon's body matched Ramini's vehicle at the time. Ramini had a violent criminal history, including convictions for assault and rape. These details finally allowed investigators to piece together the horrifying puzzle. While Ramin could not be tried, as he was long deceased, the case was officially closed, giving the Pryor family long overdue answers and closure. The brutal murder of 16-year-old Sharon was finally solved nearly half a century later, a resolution made possible by modern DNA analysis and the unwavering persistence of her family. As the ordeal unfolded, Michalina summoned the courage to ask if they planned to kill her. Marcin responded flatly, telling her not to be afraid, that he was just taking her somewhere. But what followed shattered any illusions she might have had. Marcin and Patrick silenced her with packing tape across her mouth and bound her wrists and ankles tightly. Once she was completely restrained, they tossed her aside like trash and left her lying on the hallway floor for 6 agonizing hours. At first, Michalina tried to convince herself it might be some sick joke. But as time passed, and as the pain of her restraints deepened, the reality set in. They weren't kidding. She was determined to stay awake, terrified that unconsciousness might mean never waking up again. After nightfall, the 2 men dragged her into the kitchen. She overheard them discussing using a plastic bag. Her heart pounded. She thought they were going to suffocate her right then and there, but instead, they forced her, still bound and gagged, into a cardboard box, which they began sealing shut with packing tape. She struggled, trying to scream through the tape, but Marcin only laughed. His calmness was terrifying. He leaned in and said coldly, "I've had you for 4 years. You'll never see your son again." Michalina would later say she would never forget the look on his face, eerily calm, like someone doing a routine task. With the box now fully taped shut, the 2 men carried it to Patrick's car and placed it in the trunk. They drove for what felt like miles, eventually arriving at what Michalina could tell was a remote, wooded area. The terrain was rough. She felt every rock and bump digging into her back. When the car finally stopped, the men pulled the box out and dragged it across the ground to a shallow grave they had pre-dug. They lowered the box into the hole and began shoveling dirt over it. To ensure she couldn't escape, they topped it with a 40-kilogram, 88-pound tree trunk. Inside her cardboard coffin, Michalina could hear the sound of the soil being shoveled onto her. The dirt thudded against the box. She strained to make out their voices but heard nothing that gave her hope. In that moment, she was sure she was going to die. Pain racked her body. Her limbs twisted in unnatural angles, and she struggled to breathe. She forced herself to take shallow breaths, hoping to conserve the precious oxygen inside. She listened, terrified, waiting for any sign that the men were still nearby. If she tried to escape, and they caught her, she knew they would finish the job. Then, she thought of her son. The thought of never seeing him again was unbearable. She couldn't give up. She wouldn't. After what seemed like forever, she realized she had to take a risk. Surely they had left by now. That's when she remembered something. Her engagement ring. The same one Marcin had given her. The one meant to symbolize their love. Ironically, it became her lifeline. She twisted it off her finger and began using the sharp diamond to saw at the tape on her wrists. It took everything she had, but she managed to free her hands, then her ankles. She slipped the ring back on and began slicing at the cardboard, clawing a hole through the side. Dirt immediately began falling into the box, covering her face, her clothes, her hair. With the tape now removed from her mouth, she started screaming, hoping someone, anyone, might hear her. But there was no response, so she kept fighting. She tore at the hole she'd made, pushing and clawing until she could fit her head through. With a final burst of strength, she pushed up through the dirt, through the weight, and finally her head broke the surface. She gasped for air, looked up, and saw the trees swaying overhead. She had done it. She was alive, covered in dirt, and barely able to move. Michalina didn't stop there. She pushed her arms out, then the rest of her body. Somehow, she managed to drag herself from the shallow grave and stumble to the roadside. There, in the early darkness, she flagged down a passing car. The driver, stunned by her condition, stopped immediately and called police. Within 15 minutes, officers arrived. Michalina led them back to the very spot she'd clawed her way out from. Police quickly arrested Marcin, charging him with kidnapping and attempted murder. He didn't deny what happened, but claimed it wasn't meant to be fatal. According to him, he only wanted to scare her, and had planned to come back for her. Authorities didn't believe a word of it, especially after learning that shortly after burying Michalina, Marcin and Patrick used her bank card to withdraw £500, and then went home to relax and play video games. As the investigation unfolded, the full story came to light. Marcin, 25, was a bodybuilder addicted to anabolic steroids, known to cause violent rages. He had learned that Michalina planned to leave him and take their son back to Poland. His response? Eliminate her and raise the boy with his mother instead. He'd told Michalina she wasn't as attractive as the women at the gym and changed his relationship status on Facebook, preparing to pursue someone new. But when he put his sinister plan into action, it didn't go as planned. He was frustrated that the stun gun didn't incapacitate her like he expected. In court, Michalina bravely recounted her ordeal through a Polish interpreter. He was putting the soil on top of me, she said. I wanted to push my fingers through the hole, but I was afraid if he saw them, he might break them with the shovel. She described how she remembered the engagement ring and used it to free herself, and how she could hear music from a nearby pub, a sign that she hadn't been buried far from civilization. The defense stuck to their claim that Marcin had never intended to kill her. They even argued that the cardboard box had breathing holes in it. But Michalina was clear, those holes were not left for her. She said, I can tell you now, they were not made so I could survive. The prosecution showed photographs of the box. It was undeniable. Michalina had been left for dead, and she had dug her way back to life. A trail of discarded clothing led from a hole at one end of the box. Authorities described how officers had to dig away layers of earth just to uncover parts of the container hidden beneath the surface. In January 2020, Marcin Kospczak was convicted of attempted murder and kidnapping. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. His accomplice, Patrick Beretsky, was acquitted of attempted murder, but found guilty of kidnapping and given a 4.5-year sentence. Both men were required to serve at least half of their sentences before becoming eligible for parole, but that parole eligibility would ultimately mean little for Marcin. During his arrest, investigators conducted a search of the home where Marcin, Michalina, and their son lived with Marcin's parents. Inside, they uncovered a stockpile of explosive materials and bomb-making equipment. Marcin would go on to plead guilty to 8 counts of illegal possession of explosive substances and received 4 years per count, amounting to 32 years in total, stacked on top of his 20-year sentence for the attempted murder. Michalina was relocated to a secret, undisclosed location far from the scene of the crime. Still, she lives in constant fear of him. After the verdict, she made a powerful statement. "He buried me alive and walked away thinking I would die there, cold, alone, in that terrible box. He wished for my death and plotted to kill me in the most horrific way imaginable, but I didn't let him win. Using the last of my strength, I clawed my way out of that grave. And now, he's the one behind bars." Her father echoed that sentiment, saying he'd distrusted Marcin from the very beginning. "I always knew something was off about him. We never made eye contact. He was spoiled and overprotected, an only child and a mummy's boy. His mother sheltered him like a chicken in a coop, and when he finally stepped into the world, he had no idea how to handle it." Mother Marzina expressed a deep sense of relief. "I am so happy with the verdict. For me, it finally means peace. I was waking up from nightmares, seeing Marcin's face haunting me like a ghost. It's a case many have described as poetic justice. A man who tried to strip another person of her freedom and life ended up losing his own, and were it not for the separate criminal conviction, he could have walked free far too soon. Thankfully, that will no longer be the case." Case 8. The miracle survival of Alison Baudet. Was the dead of night when 27-year-old Alison Baudet, having just suffered a horrifying and near-fatal assault, watched as her attackers finally drove away, her broken, bleeding, and barely clinging to life. She had been stabbed 37 times in the abdomen and 17 times in the neck. For a moment, Alison considered surrendering to the inevitable, but she didn't. Realizing that her stomach had been slashed open and her intestines were spilling out, Alison used a shirt to hold them in place. Then, defying all odds, she somehow got to her feet to look for help. But as she stood, her vision began to blur and her head tilted backward. That's when she placed a hand to her neck and discovered something horrifying. Her throat had been slit so deeply that she had nearly been decapitated. From that moment forward, she would have to walk, with one hand clutching her abdomen and the other holding her head in place. This case is extraordinary not just for its unimaginable brutality, but for Alison's almost superhuman will to survive. Let's go back to the beginning. On the southeastern coast of South Africa lies the coastal city of Port Elizabeth, a relaxed and vibrant community along the Indian Ocean. It was here, on September 22, 1967, that Alison was born to Claire and Brian Baudet. When Alison was just 10, her parents separated. She went on to live with her mother and older brother, an intelligent and driven student. Alison excelled academically and was even named head girl at the prestigious Collegiate High School for Girls in Port Elizabeth. After graduation, she took a few years to travel and explore the world before returning home and taking a job as an insurance broker. Alison was thriving. She had a loving family, supportive friends, and a bright future ahead, until she crossed paths with 2 monsters, Franz Dutoit and Jens Kruger. Franz Dutoit, a 26-year-old husband and father, had a lengthy and violent criminal history dating back to his teens. He was known for arson and later for repeated sexual assaults accusations that rarely led to any real consequences, likely due to his father's position as a police officer. In contrast, 19-year-old Jens Kruger came from a violent and abusive home. His father was a lifelong criminal. Kruger, unlike his self-assured friend, was consumed by resentment. He knew he wasn't attractive or intelligent. He knew women found him revolting, and over time, rejection twisted into rage, bonded by misogyny, alienation, and mutual depravity. The two men became inseparable. They were also both heavily involved in Satanism. Their dangerous companionship would ultimately lead them to Allison. On December 18, 1994, Allison had spent a sunny day at the beach with friends. That evening, they gathered at her apartment for games and pizza. As the night wore on, most friends left, except one who didn't have a ride home. Concerned about safety, Allison kindly offered to drive her friend back. That decision would change everything. After dropping her friend off, Allison returned home just after 3 a.m., but her usual parking space was taken, so she parked further down the road. As she leaned over to grab a laundry bag from the passenger seat, her car door suddenly swung open. A rush of warm air hit her as a knife pressed against her throat. A man ordered her to move over, or he would kill her. He said his name was Clinton, but he was later identified as Franz du Toit. He told her he only needed her car and wouldn't hurt her if she cooperated. Terrified, Allison handed over her keys. He drove them to pick up another man, Thunes Kruger. Then, the two took Allison to a remote, desolate area outside the city. In the car, Allison caught Kruger's reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were cold, predatory. Unlike du Toit, who feigned politeness, Kruger didn't even pretend. Allison's instincts screamed. She wasn't going to survive this. Once, in the secluded area, the men revealed their true intentions. They told her directly that they planned to rape her. When they asked if she would fight back, too terrified to resist, she said no. They dragged her from the car and threw her onto broken glass and dirt. Du Toit raped her first. Then Kruger took his turn. But it wouldn't end there. Having faced rape charges before, the two reached a chilling decision. They couldn't leave a witness behind. They had to kill her, while still assaulting her. Kruger wrapped his hands around Allison's throat, attempting to strangle her. She began losing consciousness, and her body reacted involuntarily. She defecated. That moment, as horrific as it was, would later save her life. The attackers believed she was dying. Frustrated she wasn't dead yet, they decided to make sure by stabbing her. Allison had been stabbed 37 times in the abdomen. The attack was so ferocious and focused on her midsection that her flesh was torn open, leaving her internal organs exposed. The brutality of the assault was so extreme that her attackers, Franz du Toit and Thunes Kruger, were convinced she was dead until her leg twitched. Determined to finish what they started, the pair inflicted 17 additional stab wounds, this time to her neck. As Allison drifted in and out of consciousness, she could see a blurry arm moving rhythmically above her face, accompanied by a horrifying sound she'd never forget: a wet, slashing noise. She would later recall, "All I could see was an arm, moving above my face. His movements were making a sound, a wet sound. It was the sound of my flesh being slashed open. He was cutting my throat with a knife. I felt no pain, but it was not a dream." "Do you think she's dead?" one asked. "No one can survive that," the other replied. Believing they'd succeeded, Franz and Thunes climbed back into Allison's car and drove off, casually using each other's real names, confident they'd silenced their victim forever. But they were wrong. Despite the unimaginable trauma she'd suffered, Allison was still alive. Barely breathing, naked, and mutilated, she lay in the dirt, convinced she would die. But before she did, she wanted to leave behind one last message. Using her own blood, she scrawled Franz and Thunes into the sand. Below their names, she wrote a final note to her mother: "I love Mom." But Allison wasn't done fighting. Through the bushes, she saw headlights in the distance. If she could just reach the road, someone might find her. Summoning strength she didn't know she had, Allison began to move. First crawling, then realizing it was too slow, she tried to stand. She had been nearly decapitated. When she lifted her head, her vision faded. She instinctively pulled her head forward, with one hand, and her vision returned. In the other hand, she held her intestines, trying to keep them from spilling out further. She had found her denim shirt nearby and tied it around her waist to hold her organs in, but it was barely effective. Despite collapsing multiple times, she forced herself to keep going until she finally reached the road. There, she made a conscious decision. She collapsed on the white line, the most visible spot for any approaching car. The first vehicle that approached slowed, then drove off, terrified. But then another car appeared, this one carrying a group of vacationers from Johannesburg. One of them was Tian Eilert, a young veterinary student. He jumped out and ran to Allison. Horrified by what he saw, he immediately took her trembling hand, offering whatever comfort he could. Using his veterinary training, Tian tended to her exposed thyroid, using his own shirt to stem the bleeding from her throat. Knowing she couldn't speak, he communicated through hand squeezes, once for yes, twice for no. He stayed with her for 45 minutes, gently talking and keeping her conscious until paramedics arrived. When the ambulance finally came, the paramedics were visibly shaken. They didn't believe she'd survive the trip to the hospital. But Allison wasn't ready to give up. She refused to let go of Tian's hand, and he rode with her to the hospital. Their medical staff were stunned. One doctor, Dr. Alexander Angelov, would later say, "In 16 years of practice, I had never seen such injuries." But miraculously, Allison survived. Despite being stabbed over 50 times, none of the wounds hit vital organs or major arteries. She had also been strangled during the assault, which had emptied her intestines, a gruesome detail that may have saved her from sepsis. Even though her open wounds were covered in dirt, a grueling 3-hour surgery followed. A breathing tube was inserted into her windpipe due to the neck injuries. Though she couldn't speak, Allison was still fully aware, and when detectives showed her a photo lineup, she immediately identified her attackers. She remembered everything. Franz du Toit and Dunes Kruger had extensive criminal records. Their arrests the next day were straightforward. When Detroit Franz was brought in, he assumed Allison had died, and, when told she was alive, he confessed on the spot. He even surrendered a blood-soaked ring he had taken from Allison. He later bizarrely claimed he had been possessed by a demon and needed an exorcism. Authorities entertained the request, but no ritual could save him from justice. The trial began on June 12, 1995. One defense lawyer withdrew from the case for ethical reasons after reviewing the horrifying details. In court, Allison bravely testified against her attackers. She was joined by 3 other women: a university student raped by Detroit, a pregnant woman who had been raped by both men just weeks before. Allison's attack, the pair warned her not to go to police, but she had, and a 3rd woman who narrowly escaped after recognizing them following Allison's story in the news. On August 7, 1995, both men were found guilty on all charges. The judge, appalled by their cruelty, sentenced Franz du Toit to 3 life sentences, and Dunes Kruger to 1 life sentence, plus 25 years. Judge Chris Jansen stated, "I needed to make it clear they were a threat to society and should never be released." However, under South African law at the time, anyone sentenced before October 2004 remains eligible for parole, a haunting loophole that still causes unease. Following the trial, Allison fell into depression, a natural response to such trauma. But hope returned when she reconnected with an old friend who had also endured dark times. Their bond deepened, leading to marriage in February 1997, and eventually, 2 sons. The man who found her that night, Tian Eilert, was forever changed. The encounter profoundly impacted his life, and he would always believe that he was meant to be there that night. Desperate to make Kevin's fantasy life a reality, Sabrina started plotting. When she couldn't bring herself to kill Lisa Naffel on her own, she asked her friend Autumn Padlock for help, specifically to find someone who could do the job for her. Autumn was horrified. She backed away immediately, warning Sabrina this was not the path she wanted to take. But Sabrina didn't care. She was fixated, driven by Kevin's promises and poisoned dreams. Autumn eventually moved away, but her brief conversation with Sabrina about hiring a hitman would later resurface as a chilling piece of evidence. On October 27th, Sabrina turned 18. Legally, her time in the foster care system and with the Neff family was over. But instead of leaving, she petitioned the court to stay longer, claiming she needed time to finish high school. The court agreed. Just 3 weeks later, the quiet in the Naffel home shattered forever. November 16th, a frantic 911 call came in. Through desperate sobs, 13-year-old Megan Zala screamed into the phone. "I can't breathe, you're going to have to take a deep breath. I can't understand you." Megan had been jolted awake by the sound of her mother's screaming. She ran into Lisa's bedroom and saw something no child should ever witness. Sabrina Zunich, wearing a ski mask, stabbing her foster mother again and again and again. Even as Megan begged her to stop, Sabrina kept going, relentless and silent. When police arrived, they found Sabrina still holding a blood-soaked kitchen knife. The 15-inch knife had a 9-inch blade, and the metal was bent, warped from the sheer force used during the attack. Little Haley, the youngest daughter, had hidden in the master bedroom closet. Megan, covered in blood, was inconsolable after watching her mother be brutally murdered. Lisa Naffel had been stabbed 178 times to her torso, neck, and head. Some wounds showed signs of twisting, indicating the knife had been driven in and rotated inside her body. And Kevin, he was conveniently 300 miles away, in Michigan. When it happened, when he returned and learned Lisa had been killed, his reaction raised immediate red flags. He didn't cry, he didn't collapse, he didn't ask how it had happened. Instead, he asked questions. Cold, calculated questions, almost like a man who already knew the answers. Sabrina was taken to the hospital for treatment. The deep cuts on her hands, defensive wounds, spoke volumes about the struggle. 10 hours later, she was brought to the police station for questioning. Kevin's manipulation had been thorough. Sabrina tried to play her part, pretending not to remember anything from the night before. But detectives were experienced. They changed tactics, drawing her in emotionally. "Kevin's a miracle," she said. "Eventually, he's the one that helps me out, because Lisa has Megan to deal with, and so we made agreements a long time ago, that if I need anything, I can go to Kevin." That was the crack detectives needed. They gently leaned into the emotional dynamics between Sabrina, Lisa, and Kevin. When they told her Lisa was dead news, she still claimed not to remember. Sabrina appeared stunned. The interview ended there. She was arrested and booked into the Lake County jail. But something strange happened the very next day. Kevin Naffel showed up at the jail demanding to see Sabrina. He was turned away, but it was just the beginning. Over the coming weeks and months, Kevin's behavior only grew more suspicious. Friends and family watched in stunned disbelief as he showed no signs of mourning. Instead, he began spending. He cashed in Lisa's life insurance policy, remodeled his home, bought expensive cars, took flying lessons, installed a swimming pool, and even purchased a $225,000 home in Florida. He wasn't grieving, he was celebrating, and Sabrina was watching at first. She stayed loyal, refusing to name Kevin as a co-conspirator. But as months passed, and she realized she'd been used, discarded her, feelings shifted to betrayal. By May 2013, she was done protecting him. She agreed to a proffer deal with prosecutors, a kind of legal immunity agreement that allowed her to speak freely and honestly without her words being used against her in court. This was the first step toward a plea bargain, and the moment Kevin's carefully constructed lies began to unravel, Sabrina confessed. It had all been Kevin's plan. He'd groomed her, convinced her, brainwashed her. He'd promised her love, a future, and a life with him if she helped remove the one thing standing in their way, Sabrina told investigators. how Kevin had manipulated her into believing that killing Lisa was the only way they could truly be together. According to Sabrina, Kevin claimed Lisa was worth more to him dead than alive. After convincing her to move forward with the plan, Kevin took out 2 life insurance policies on Lisa, totaling over $750,000. Sabrina admitted that she felt murder was the only option. For the first time in her life, she felt genuinely happy and secure in a home, and she didn't want anything to jeopardize that. When Kevin presented the plan to kill Lisa, she felt powerless to refuse. With Sabrina's confession in hand, police began building their case against Kevin. They also started looking for anyone who could support Sabrina's version of events. That's when they reached out to Autumn Pavic, an old friend of Sabrina, someone she had once asked to help find a hitman. Although Autumn had moved to California shortly before Lisa's death, she never forgot the chilling conversations she had with Sabrina in the weeks leading up to the murder. Detectives contacted Autumn and asked if she would be willing to call Kevin, leaving a voicemail that suggested she needed to talk about something important. Both Sabrina and Autumn had confirmed that Kevin knew about the hitman discussions. Investigators hoped the sound of Autumn's voice would rattle him. It worked. Kevin returned her call, unaware that investigators were recording everything. On the call, Autumn told him she was afraid of getting caught up in the investigation if the hit talk ever surfaced. Kevin tried to reassure her, insisting there was nothing that could implicate her, but he stayed vague and evasive. Since the phone call didn't produce anything incriminating, police switched strategies. In early July, with Autumn visiting family in Ohio, detectives asked her to go to Kevin's home, wearing a wire. She agreed. Inside Kevin's home for 43 minutes, Autumn repeatedly voiced her fears about getting arrested over the hitman plot. But Kevin continued to deflect, dismissing her concerns by saying, "Sabrina said a lot of damn things." Though the wired conversation didn't yield a confession, it only strengthened investigators' resolve. They turned their attention to Kevin and Sabrina's phone records, hoping to uncover evidence that could further support Sabrina's story. There, they struck gold. Between November 1st and November 16th, 2012, just before Lisa's murder, Kevin and Sabrina had exchanged nearly 1,500 text messages. Remarkably, 78 of those texts were sent during the critical 5 to 6 hour window, immediately before Lisa was killed. While the exact content of those messages was never made public, they were considered one of the final, crucial pieces of evidence needed to secure the case. On August 9th, 2013, Kevin Nafziger was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated murder, complicity to aggravated murder, and 6 counts of sexual battery. His trial began in May 2014. Kevin denied all involvement, claiming Sabrina acted alone. However, Sabrina's testimony proved pivotal. After more than 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kevin guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Sabrina was tried a few months later. In August 2014, she pled guilty to 1 count of murder and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. During sentencing, she addressed the court with the following words: "I want to say how sorry I am for all those I hurt. Lisa did not deserve what happened to her. I ask that forgiveness be given to me, not for my own benefit, but for those who need to begin healing. I can't explain how much remorse I have and how much sadness I deal with." After the hearing, Sabrina's defense attorney said that Kevin had hijacked her future, pointing out that she would be 47 years old by the time she'd be eligible for release in 2042. In 2017, a civil court awarded $6.2 million in damages to Lisa's daughters, Megan and Haley Nafziger. Of that, Sabrina was held liable for $5 million, and Kevin for $1.2 million. The suit aimed to compensate the girls for the immense emotional trauma and loss they suffered as a result of their mother's brutal murder. As of 2024, Sabrina Zunich is 30 years old and remains incarcerated at Dayton Correctional Institution in Ohio. In 2019, she gave an interview for the TV series Snapped, Behind Bars, where she opened up about her role in the crime, the events that led up to it, and the overwhelming remorse she continues to carry. She'll be eligible for parole in 2042. Kevin Nafziger, now 54, is serving his sentence at Lake Erie Correctional Institution. He has kept a low profile during his incarceration, and little is publicly known about his prison life, given the additional 12-year sentence for the sexual battery charges. The Department of Corrections has set his earliest possible release date for 4/25/5. We hope this video helped honor the memory of Lisa Nafziger, a woman whose life was stolen far too soon, and brought some clarity to the twisted and tragic events that led to her death. About Sabrina, while she was undoubtedly the killer, some analysts argue that Kevin exploited her vulnerabilities, manipulating her into doing what he ultimately wanted. But does that make her any less culpable? After all, Sabrina stabbed Lisa 178 times, a number no one disputes, and such sheer brutality could only have come from a place of intense rage. So, the question remains, should her guilt be seen through the lens of manipulation, or judged by the savagery of the act itself? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Case 10A. Father gets a call at work. There's been an emergency. He rushes home, only to find the front door locked. He runs around the house and enters through the back. What he walks into is a nightmare, a bloodbath. His 18-year-old daughter is lying dead on the floor, beaten, stabbed, murdered. Nearby, his 16-year-old son has suffered the same horrific fate. Panicked and fearing for the safety of his other daughter, a recently adopted orphan, he calls out her name. No answer. But a few minutes later, she emerges, her hair wet. The father runs to her and embraces her, thinking the moisture is blood. But it isn't. She calmly explains she had just taken a bath. When he asks her what happened, she claims intruders broke into the house and murdered her siblings while she hid under a bed. But something didn't sit right. The father's gut told him the truth was far more disturbing. The Magwad family lived in Cotabato, a province in the Philippines. They were a tight-knit, well-respected household. Cruz, the father, was a high school teacher. His wife Lila worked as the principal of the local elementary school. Though modest in income, the family lived a comfortable life. Their two biological children, 18-year-old Gwen and 16-year-old Luis, were high-achieving students. Gwen was pursuing nursing, and Luis aspired to become a lawyer. Both were not only bright, but deeply compassionate. In 2021, Gwen met 17-year-old Janice Cabio, sometimes referred to as Christine in the media, at an event. Janice had come with the family she worked for, who were friends of the Magwads. She and Gwen quickly bonded. Janice told Gwen and Luis that she was an orphan with no memories before the age of 8. She described her life as one of servitude, looking after the children of the family she lived with, cooking, cleaning, with no opportunity to go to school. Despite her hard work, she earned almost nothing. Gwen and Luis were devastated by her story. They begged their parents to adopt Janice and give her a better life. At first, Cruz and Lila were hesitant. The house was small, but their children were insistent. Luis even offered to give up his own bedroom so Janice could have a place to sleep. He was willing to sleep on the living room couch just to help.